At our family barbecue, my older brother raised his glass and announced the biggest regret of his life. I've spent the last 5 years destroying my back as a commercial HVAC technician in Chicago. Winter nights on frozen skyscraper roofs, summer days in 130-degree boiler rooms. My parents always swore they would co-sign the small business loan I needed to open my own custom auto restoration shop. They promised it for years. But the week I finally found the perfect commercial garage in 2021, they suddenly developed amnesia, claiming the risk was just too high for their retirement profile. I was left completely humiliated. So, I did it the hard way. I picked up every overtime shift, lived in a tiny 400 square foot studio in Pilsen, and ate cheap ramen. I hoarded every single paycheck until I had exactly $68,450 sitting in a high-yield savings account. My older brother, Julian, is the family golden child and a complete financial disaster. He's a crypto day trader who constantly burns through cash trying to get rich quick. Last week, I went over to my parents' house in Naperville to help them set up their new smart home security system. I brought my iPad to test the camera feeds and accidentally left it on the kitchen counter when I went out to grab us lunch. Julian was visiting, supposedly to drop off some tools. He picked up my tablet to browse the internet. Right at that exact moment, an automated push notification from my Marcus banking app popped up on the lock screen. Congratulations, your balance has reached $68,450.22. Keep up the great saving. I didn't know he saw it until 3 days later. We were all up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, at a rented lake house for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be a relaxed Saturday night barbecue. I was flipping burgers on the deck when Julian aggressively clinked his beer glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. He started giving this sappy, tear-eyed toast about family sticking together through thick and thin. Then he turned directly to me and announced to the entire deck, and I want to publicly thank my amazing little brother. I've been hit with a massive $45,000 IRS tax lien from some crypto investments that crashed. I was facing severe wage garnishment and total ruin, but he's graciously agreed to dip into his massive secret savings fund to bail me out. That's what real brotherhood is. My jaw locked. I hadn't agreed to anything. I didn't even know about his tax problems. Everyone started clapping. My mom walked over and hugged me, whispering, "Thank you for saving him. He's been so stressed." I stepped back and loudly said, "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, Julian. I'm not giving you a single dime." The entire deck went dead silent. Julian's fake smile vanished. "Bro, come on. I saw the bank notification on your iPad. You're sitting on almost 70 grand. I just need 45 to clear the feds. You don't even have a mortgage. You're just hoarding it." My dad chimed in, using his stern patriarch voice. "You shouldn't have lied by omission about having that kind of wealth. Your brother is facing a federal crisis. You can delay your little garage project for a few more years to keep him out of jail." That was the spark that blew the powder keg. I looked at my dad and let him have it. My little garage project, the one you promised to help me with and then completely abandoned me on, I spent 5 years freezing on rooftops to earn that money because your promises were entirely worthless. And Julian, invading my digital privacy doesn't entitle you to my blood and sweat. You gambled on meme coins, now you can deal with the consequences. Julian started screaming that I was letting the government destroy his life over selfish greed. My mom started sobbing hysterically, begging me not to ruin their milestone anniversary trip over money. I didn't stick around for dessert. I walked inside, grabbed my duffel bag, and drove the 2 hours back to Chicago in pure silence. First thing Monday morning, I didn't just ignore their calls. I drove straight to the commercial real estate broker. I put down $55,000 as a massive prepayment and security deposit on a 5-year lease for a prime garage space in the West Loop. I locked the capital away permanently in an ironclad commercial contract so it physically couldn't be touched. I took a photo of the signed lease, texted it to Julian with the caption, "Looks like I'm a little short on liquidity. Call the IRS and ask for a payment plan," and then blocked the entire family. The silence was the best part of that first week. I spent it in the new shop, a cavernous, oil-stained concrete box on Lake Street with high ceilings and industrial windows that looked out toward the L tracks. The smell of old grease and floor sealant was better than any expensive cologne. It was mine. Every square inch of it was bought with the cartilage I'd ground down in those HVAC units. But silence in a family like mine isn't ever permanent. It's just a pause while they reload. By Thursday, the voicemails started coming from different numbers. My dad was using his office landline. He didn't sound angry anymore, which was worse. He sounded disappointed. He told me that Julian's situation had escalated. Apparently, the IRS wasn't his only problem. He'd borrowed $12,000 from a private acquaintance to cover his rent for the last 6 months, and that person wasn't interested in a payment plan. I sat on a milk crate in my empty shop, listening to the echoes. My dad said, "We're not asking for the whole amount now, son. We know you signed that lease to spite us, but you must have something left. A few thousand to get these people off his back. Your mother hasn't slept in 3 days." I deleted the message. I had exactly $13,450 left in my savings. That was supposed to be for my first 2 lifts, a heavy-duty air compressor, and a basic set of professional snap-on tools. If I gave that to Julian, I'd have a beautiful empty building and no way to actually work. I'd be paying rent on a monument to my own failure. Friday afternoon, there was a knock on the heavy steel roll-up door. I thought it was the utility guy coming to switch the power to my name. I pulled the chain and the door rattled up with a deafening metallic screech. It wasn't the utility guy, it was my mother. She was standing there in a beige trench coat, looking 10 years older than she did at the barbecue. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked into the center of the shop, her heels clicking on the concrete, and looked around at the bare walls. "It's very large," she finally said. Her voice was thin. "It's what I need, Mom," I said. "I didn't move from the workbench I was assembling." "You did this so fast," she whispered, "just to make sure we couldn't touch it. Did you really think we were going to rob you?" Julian tried to announce my money as his own in front of 30 people, I reminded her. "And Dad told me my career was a little project. You didn't defend me. You hugged me because you thought I was paying his bills." She sat down on a stack of tires that the previous tenant had left behind. "Julian is weak, Leo. We know that. We've always known that. But he's your brother. He's in Naperville right now, crying in his old bedroom. He told us he's lost everything. The car, the apartment. He's even sold his watch. He's looking at a future where he has nothing. He has what he earned," I said. It sounded cold, but it was the truth. I have what I earned. Why is my everything supposed to be his safety net? She looked up at me, and for a second, I saw the woman who used to pack my lunches and tell me I could be anything. Then her face hardened. "Because we are your parents, and we are telling you that this has gone too far. Your father and I are taking out a second mortgage on the house to cover the rest of the IRS debt. We shouldn't have to do that at 65. If you give us the $13,000 you have left, we won't have to borrow as much. It's a compromise, Leo. It's the only way this family survives." I felt a physical weight in my chest. A second mortgage. They were willing to gamble their entire retirement, the house I grew up in, just to keep Julian from facing the reality of his own stupidity. And they wanted me to subsidize that gamble. "If you do that," I said, my voice shaking, "he'll never learn. He'll just wait for the next bailout. He's family," she snapped, standing up. "And right now, you're the only one acting like a stranger. If you don't help us with this, don't bother coming for Sunday dinner. Don't bother calling on Christmas. Your father is done, Leo. He's done with the selfishness." She walked out without looking back. I stood in the middle of my dream, and for the first time, it felt like a cold, empty warehouse. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a shared family photo album we'd had for years. Julian had posted a photo. It was a picture of my parents' house, the big, beautiful colonial with the wraparound porch. The caption read, "Sacrificing everything for each other. That's what love looks like." Sorry, some people don't understand that. I stared at the screen until it went dark. He wasn't just taking their money, he was gloating. He was framing my hard work as selfishness while he actively drained our parents' future. I didn't reply. I went to the hardware store and bought the heaviest industrial deadbolt they had. I spent the night installing it on the shop door. I wasn't going to give them the 13 grand. I couldn't. I had already put an order in for the lifts. The delivery was scheduled for Monday. Saturday morning, I got a text from an unknown number. It was just a photo of a legal document, a formal demand letter from a law firm in the suburbs. Julian wasn't just being bailed out by my parents. He was trying to sue me. I called the number. Julian picked up on the first ring. He sounded smug. "What is this, Julian?" "It's a claim for emotional distress and verbal defamation, Leo," he said. "You humiliated me in front of our entire extended family. You called me a gambler and a liar in front of Aunt Martha and the cousins. I have witnesses. And since you've got so much cash to throw around on West Loop real estate, I figured you could afford a settlement." "You're kidding," I said, a hollow laugh escaping my throat. "You're suing your own brother because I wouldn't give you a gift?" "I'm suing because you attacked my character to hide your own greed," he said. "Dad's actually the one who suggested it. He said if you're going to act like a businessman instead of a son, then we'll treat you like one. See you in court, Leo." He hung up. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. My dad, the man who taught me how to throw a baseball, the man who told me a man's word is his bond, was helping Julian sue me for the rest of my savings. I looked around the shop. The light was hitting the floor just right, showing the potential of the space, but the walls felt like they were closing in. I realized then that they weren't trying to help Julian. They were trying to break me. They couldn't stand that I had succeeded without them after they'd backed out of their promise. My success was a constant reminder of their failure as parents, and they wanted it gone. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I called my contact at the HVAC union. I asked if there were any emergency weekend shifts available. "Kid, you just started your own business," he said. "You should be celebrating." "I need the hours, Mike," I said. "I need every cent I can get." I spent the next 48 hours on a roof in the loop, repairing a massive chiller unit that had blown a seal. I worked until my hands were numb and my eyes were stinging from the wind. I made $2 grand in hazard pay. When I finally got back to the shop on Monday morning, the delivery truck for my lifts was already there. The driver was a big guy named Sal. He looked at me, then at the empty shop, then at the legal papers sitting on my workbench that I'd left out. "Tough start?" he asked, nodding at the demand for settlement letter. "Family?" I said, rubbing my face. "Yeah," Sal said, spitting a bit of tobacco into a cup. "They're the ones who know exactly where to twist the knife, ain't they?" As we were unloading the heavy steel pillars of the lift, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. My heart sank. I thought it was Julian coming to gloat, but it wasn't Julian. It was a man I hadn't seen in 3 years. Uncle Richie, my dad's younger brother. He was the black sheep of the family, the one nobody talked about because he'd moved to Vegas and gotten into some trouble years ago. Richie climbed out of the car, looking sharp in a gray suit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. He walked into the shop, ignored the lifts, and looked straight at me. "I heard the toast at the barbecue," Richie said. "Martha called me. She thought it was hilarious. Then she called me this morning and told me your dad is helping that idiot Julian file a nuisance suit." "He is," I said, wiping grease off my hands. "I don't know what to do, Richie. If I fight it, I lose the money to legal fees. If I settle, I lose the business." Richie looked around the shop, his eyes scanning the rafters. "Your dad always always was a bully when he felt small, and right now, seeing you in this place, he feels microscopic. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. I'm not gonna give you money, Leo. That's how Julian got this way, but I am gonna give you something else. Your father has been holding a secret for 20 years. Something about the inheritance your grandma left that somehow only ended up in his name. Richie opened the notebook and slid a yellowed piece of paper across the workbench. I've been waiting for a reason to use this. I think you just gave it to me. I stared down at the paper. It was a photocopy, the edges darkened from sitting in a file cabinet for 2 decades. It was a probate court filing from Cook County, dated October 1999, the year after my grandmother died. I wiped the grease off my thumb before touching it. It was a schedule of assets. At the bottom, highlighted in faded yellow marker, was a line item for a 2-family duplex in Skokie. She bought that place in the 70s, Richie said, his voice flat. Lived in the bottom, rented out the top. When she got sick, your dad took over power of attorney. He told Martha and me that the medical bills and the nursing home drained the estate. He said the duplex had to go to the bank to settle her debts. Richie tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. It didn't go to the bank. He sold it to a private buyer for $280 grand. He paid off about $40,000 in medical bills, and the rest? He funneled it into a separate trust that he controlled. 6 months later, you guys moved out of that cramped apartment in Logan Square and bought the big colonial in Naperville. He used our mother's money meant to be split 3 ways to buy his dream house. The shop suddenly felt very quiet. Sal, the delivery driver, had tactfully walked back out to his truck, leaving us alone with the heavy steel pillars sitting on the concrete. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, looking up at him. Why didn't you sue him? With what money, Leo? Richie let out a dry, humorless laugh. I was 24, working as a barback, and I had 2 DUIs. Martha was a single mom working retail. Your dad was the responsible older brother with a salary and a mortgage. Who was a judge going to believe? By the time I scraped together enough money to hire a guy to look into the probate records, the statute of limitations on contesting the estate was almost up, and I was moving to Vegas. I kept it because I figured one day your dad's sanctimonious bullshit was going to catch up with him. He slid the notebook back into his pocket. He's been lecturing this entire family on responsibility for 30 years, playing the self-made patriarch. He built his whole life on a stolen foundation, and now he's suing you for not bailing out his favorite son. I looked at the piece of paper. The numbers were right there in black and white. $280,000, my childhood home, the wraparound porch, the big backyard where we played catch. It was all bought with stolen money. I leave the copy with you, Richie said, turning toward the door. Do whatever you want with it. Burn it, frame it, shove it down his throat. I don't care. I just thought the guy building his own business from scratch deserved to know the truth about the guy trying to tear it down. He walked out, getting back into his SUV and driving off toward the highway. I stood there for a long time. Sal came back in, carrying the hydraulic pump for the lift. I helped him bolt it to the base plate, my arms moving on autopilot. I signed the delivery manifest, gave Sal a $20 tip for his trouble, and locked the rolling steel door behind him. I didn't call the lawyer whose name was on the demand letter. I didn't text my mother. I walked to the utility sink in the corner of the shop, scrubbed the dirt and grease off my hands with pumice soap, dried them on a blue shop towel, and folded the probate copy into my back pocket. I got in my truck and drove to Naperville. It was mid-afternoon on a Monday. The neighborhood was completely silent, just the hum of landscaping crews a few streets over and the distant sound of a lawnmower. I pulled into the driveway and parked right behind my dad's pristine Ford Explorer. I didn't knock. I still had my key. I unlocked the front door and walked in. The house smelled like cinnamon plugins and expensive floor wax. It was exactly the same as it had been when I was a kid, just with nicer furniture. My dad was sitting at the kitchen island, his laptop open, a stack of manila folders spread out in front of him. He was wearing his reading glasses, rubbing his temples. When he heard my boots on the hardwood, his head snapped up. For a second, he looked relieved, like he thought I was walking in with a checkbook. Then, he saw my face. Leo, he said, taking off his glasses. He immediately shifted into his authoritative voice, sitting up straighter. I wasn't expecting you. If you're here about the letter, we can have a civil conversation. But you need to understand that your brother's mental health is deteriorating, and your actions— Shut up, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it flat, like I was telling him the time. His mouth opened and closed. Nobody told my dad to shut up in his own house. His face started to turn a dull, angry red. Excuse me? You march into my home after humiliating your brother and ignoring your mother's pleas, and you speak to me like that? I walked up to the island, pulled the folded piece of paper out of my pocket, smoothed it out, and slid it across the marble countertop so it stopped right on top of his keyboard. Richie came by my shop this morning, I said. My dad looked down at the paper. I watched his eyes track over the faded yellow highlight. I watched the angry red color completely drain from his face, replaced by a sickly, chalky white. He didn't say anything. He didn't even breathe. He just stared at the Skokie duplex line item. He told me about the trust, I said, leaning my hands on the edge of the island. He told me about how you drained Grandma's estate to buy this house. The house you're now taking a second mortgage out on to bail out Julian? My dad finally looked up. He looked old. The stern patriarch mask shattered into a dozen pieces, leaving behind a terrified, cornered man. Leo, you don't understand, he stammered, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. It wasn't. It wasn't like that. The medical bills were astronomical. I took care of her for 3 years while Richie was off drinking, and Martha was barely scraping by. I was the one driving her to dialysis. I earned— You stole, I corrected him. You stole from your brother and sister. You lied to them for 25 years. You sat at every Thanksgiving table and acted like you were the gold standard of this family, and you bought your seat at the head of the table with their money. He stood up, pushing the chair back so hard it scraped loudly against the tile. Don't you dare judge me. You have no idea the pressure I was under. Providing for you, providing for Julian, keeping this family afloat. You think a house like this just falls out of the sky? No, I said quietly. I know exactly how hard it is to build something. I just spent 5 years freezing on rooftops to get what I have. You stole yours. I tapped the paper. Here is how this is going to work. You are going to call the lawyer who sent me that ridiculous demand letter. You are going to tell him the lawsuit is officially dropped. Then, you are going to call Julian and tell him that if he ever contacts me again, ever mentions my name again, I am going to mail a copy of this document to Aunt Martha. And then I'm going to help her hire the most vicious probate litigation attorney in Chicago. My dad swallowed hard. His hands were actually shaking. He looked at the laptop, then at the paper, then back at me. Leo, please, he whispered, all the fight completely gone from him. Please, you can't do this. You don't understand what's actually happening with Julian. I don't care about Julian's IRS debt, I said, turning away. It's not just the IRS, my dad blurted out. The desperation in his voice made me stop. I turned back around. He was leaning heavily on the kitchen island, his knuckles white. The crypto investments, he said, breathing heavily, as if the words physically hurt him to say. Julian didn't just lose his own money. A year ago, he came to me. He had a massive margin call. He said he was going to lose everything, that he just needed a bridge loan to cover the margin until the market recovered. He swore to me it was a sure thing. A cold, sinking feeling started in my gut. Dad, what did you do? He couldn't look me in the eye. He looked down at the hardwood floor. I co-signed a personal liability loan, he whispered. A large one, against my retirement accounts. If Julian goes bankrupt, if he defaults. The bank doesn't just take his car. They take my pension. They take the 401k. They take it all. He finally looked up, and there were tears in his eyes. That's why we need your money, Leo. It's not just for him. If you don't help us pay down this debt, your mother and I are going to lose everything. I didn't feel the sympathy I was supposed to feel. I didn't feel the crushing weight of a son's duty. I just felt a cold, clinical curiosity. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life telling me that hard work was the only way to get ahead, and I realized he'd been gambling with other people's chips the whole time. First his mother's, and now mine. You co-signed for Julian? I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. Knowing he's a disaster. Knowing he burns through cash like it's trash. You put mom's house and your retirement on the line for a guy who buys digital pictures of monkeys for a living. He's my son! Dad shouted, but it didn't have the usual bass. It was a desperate, high-pitched yelp. I thought if I gave him enough of a cushion, he'd finally make it. I thought he was on the verge of something big. He showed me the charts, Leo. He showed me the projections. He showed you what he wanted you to see, I said. Just like you showed me what you wanted me to see. The successful businessman who built everything from nothing. You're both frauds. You just use different words to hide it. He slumped back against the counter, looking at the probate document, as if it might catch fire if he stared at it hard enough. The silence in the kitchen was thick, heavy with the smell of the pot roast. My mom probably had slow cooking for a dinner I wasn't supposed to be invited to. How much? I asked. What? The personal liability loan. How much did you co-sign for? He hesitated, his eyes darting toward the hallway, checking for my mother. $200,000. It was supposed to be a short-term liquidity bridge, but the market crashed, and the interest it's a variable rate. It's predatory, Leo. I didn't read the fine print carefully enough. I almost laughed. A man who had spent 40 years in corporate logistics, a man who prided himself on reading every line, had signed a predatory loan for $200,000 to fund his son's gambling habit. Drop the suit, I said. Call the lawyer right now. On speaker. He didn't argue. He picked up his phone with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. He dialed the number for the firm in Schaumburg. I stood there, listening to the ringing, listening to the receptionist, and then finally listening to the attorney, a guy named Miller. Bernie? The lawyer said. Did the kid cave? My dad looked at me, his face twisted in shame. No, Gary, I'm dropping it. All of it. The defamation, the emotional distress. I want the file closed today. I'll pay the retainer balance this afternoon. Bernie, are you sure? We have a strong case for— Close it, Gary. Now. He hung up and set the phone on the marble. Now call Julian, I said. Leo, please. He's already on the edge. If I tell him this, he might— Call him. Tell him the bank is closed. Tell him if he ever mentions my name, my business, or my money again, the rest of the family gets a copy of that duplex sale. And tell him that if he tries to come to my shop, I've already got a restraining order drafted. It just needs a signature. He made the call. It was shorter. Julian started to scream on the other end, his voice tinny and frantic through the speaker. He called me a traitor, a rat, and a miserly prick. My dad didn't defend me. He just listened, his eyes closed, until Julian ran out of breath. Then Dad said, "It's over, Julian, don't call him," and ended the call. I picked up the probate paper. I wasn't going to leave it there for him to destroy. "I'm going to keep this," I said. "As long as you and Mom leave me alone, it stays in my safe. But the second I see a lawyer's letter, or the second Mom shows up at my door crying about Julian's needs, I'm calling Richie and Martha. And then I'm calling the IRS to ask them if they've ever looked into that $1,999 trust you set up." I walked toward the front door. My boots sounded heavy on the floor he'd bought with Richie's inheritance. "Leo," he called out. I stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "What am I supposed to tell your mother?" he asked. "About the money? About the house?" "Tell her the truth for once," I said. "Or tell her a lie." lie. You're good at both. I drove back to the city. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a dull, rhythmic thud. I should have felt victorious. I'd shut them down. I'd protected my shop. But as I pulled up to the West Loop garage, I saw a familiar silver BMW parked in front of my roll-up door. It was my sister, Martha's, car. She was leaning against the fender, smoking a cigarette, her face set in a grim expression I knew all too well. She didn't look like she was there to congratulate me. She saw my truck and stood up straight, tossing the cigarette onto the pavement and grinding it out with her heel. I parked, took a deep breath, and stepped out. Richie called me, she said before I could even say hello. She looked at the shop, then back at me. He told me what he gave you. He told me you were headed to Naperville to burn the house down. I didn't burn anything down, Martha. I just leveled the playing field. Did you? She walked over to me, her eyes red-rimmed. Richie told me about the duplex. He's been sitting on that for years, Leo. He waited until now to tell you because he knew you'd use it like a grenade. He didn't do it to help you. He did it because he's still pissed he didn't get his cut 20 years ago. Does it matter why he did it? I asked. Dad stole from you. From both of you. He used that money to buy a lifestyle he couldn't afford, and then used it to look down on us for years. I know, she said, her voice cracking. I've suspected it for a long time. But Leo, Julian just called me. He's at the house. He said Dad had a collapse after you left. He said Mom is calling an ambulance. I felt a cold prickle of sweat on the back of my neck. He's lying. He's trying to guilt me back into the fold. It's a play, Martha. It's a classic Julian move. It's not Julian I'm worried about, she said, stepping closer. It's the fact that Julian is currently going through Dad's office files. He found the paperwork for the second mortgage, and he found something else, Leo. Something Dad didn't tell you. Something about the shop you just signed for. I frowned. What are you talking about? I signed that lease with a private broker. Dad had nothing to do with it. Martha reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She pulled up a photo Julian had just sent her. It was a scanned copy of a deed of trust. The commercial building you're standing in, Leo, the one you just put $55,000 into, she showed me the screen. The owner of the property wasn't the broker I dealt with. The broker was just a management firm. The building was owned by an LLC called Blue Chip Naperville. I looked it up on the Illinois Secretary of State website while I was waiting for you, Martha said, her voice trembling. The registered agent for Blue Chip Naperville is our father. He didn't abandon your garage project, Leo. He bought the building 2 years ago. He's been waiting for you to save up enough to be his tenant. You didn't lock your money away from him. You handed it directly to him. I looked at the massive steel door of my shop. I looked at the new deadbolt I'd installed with such pride. I hadn't escaped. I'd just built my own cage, and I'd paid my jailer 5 years of my life for the privilege. Number ending times Blue Chip Naperville. I stood there looking at the photo on Martha's screen, and the only thing I could think was, of course. Not as a revelation, not as a shock. Just that flat, almost tranquil feeling when a puzzle you've been staring at for years finally accepts its last piece. 5 years on frozen rooftops, 5 years of ramen, and a 400 square foot studio, and every single overtime shift Mike could throw at me. And at the end of it, I had handed my father a building he'd been waiting to rent me since before I ever started saving. Leo, Martha's voice was careful. Say something. Not yet, I said. I walked to the roll-up door and pulled the chain. The door rattled up with the sound I had spent 3 days falling in love with, that massive industrial clang, like a curtain going up on something. I walked inside. Martha followed without asking. The hydraulic columns of the new lift were still laid out on the concrete floor, unassembled, waiting to become something. I sat down on the lip of the old floor drain in the center of the shop and looked up at the ceiling. The industrial windows were letting the late afternoon light in at a diagonal, gray and flat and honest, the way Chicago light is in the shoulder season when it's not trying to be anything. How sure are you? I asked. Martha sat down on the stack of tires the previous tenant had left, the same stack my mother had sat on 3 days ago. It seemed to be the only seating the building had to offer. The registration date is October 2021. I looked it up on my phone while I was waiting for you. October 2021. The month I found the perfect commercial space, and my parents sat me down and told me the risk was too high for their retirement profile. I had believed they abandoned me. What they had actually done was buy the building before I could rent it from someone else and then wait, patiently and silently, for me to accumulate enough capital to become their tenant. My father hadn't watched me fail. He had watched me save. He had monitored the whole process like a silent investor, routed a management company between himself and the listing so it looked like a neutral market offering, and then sat back while I handed a broker $55,000 in good faith, straight into Blue Chip Naperville, straight into his pocket. Did he control the broker? I asked. The management company is a subsidiary. I spent 20 minutes on the Illinois Secretary of State site. It's all linked. So this wasn't a coincidence. He was waiting for me. He was waiting for your money, Martha said. No cruelty in her voice, just a kind of bone-deep exhaustion. That's not the same thing. I rubbed my face. The smell of old machine oil and fresh floor sealant was still there. The smell I had been treating like a homecoming for 3 days. Now it didn't smell like anything. What about Dad's collapse? I asked. Martha hesitated, the specific hesitation I knew from her. Not the hesitation of a lie, but the hesitation of a woman who has something real to say and hasn't quite found the shape of it yet. Julian called me. He sounded wound up, not panicked. He's very good at making wound up and panicked sound identical when it serves him. So it's a Julian production. I called Mom while I was standing outside waiting for you. She sounded exhausted, not frightened. She said Dad was lying on the couch and refusing to talk. That's not a cardiac cardiac event. That's a man who doesn't want to sit with the consequences of his own decisions. I nodded. That tracked. That was the man I knew. Not weak, but stubborn, to the edge of self-erasure. When he suffered in ways that required other people to attend to him. Martha, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Ask. Richie, did he tell you before? About the duplex? About the trust? Any time in the last few years? She looked at her hands. A long time. He implied that Dad wasn't entirely clean. About 3 years ago. We were in Milwaukee for Christmas, just the two of us, without the whole family. He had too much to drink and started talking about the estate. I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was old, drunk resentment. Did you ever look into it? No, she said, quietly. I didn't want to know. I understood that. That was the third way people handle knowledge that will hurt them. Not denial, not confrontation, but an active decision not to pull the curtain back. Martha had a daughter and a mortgage, and a job as an RN on a cardiac floor. She didn't have the bandwidth for a probate fight with the man who organized her Christmases. I stood up. My knees cracked 5 years of shift work on metal rooftops, permanently notated in the cartilage. I walked to the utility sink, turned the cold water on, and washed my hands even though they weren't dirty. It was a habit. When I didn't know what came next, I started with my hands. The lease is valid, I said, with my back to her. I signed it with a registered LLC, not a private individual. Whatever's behind that LLC, the contract is legal. He can't just throw me out. I know, Martha said, but he's your landlord, Leo. For 5 years, every rent check goes to him. Every maintenance request, every renewal negotiation, you're dependent on him. That's what he built. Not a trap, a tether. He wanted to be the father who helped me, I said, even if I didn't know it. He wanted to keep his hands on the wheel, Martha said. That's not the same as helping. We stood there for a moment, the L train rumbling past outside, the light going softer. Then I took out my phone. I didn't call my father. I called the broker, the man who had shown me the space, sent me the floor plans, walked me through the lease terms as though he were an independent party acting in my interests. He picked up on the third ring. Leo, how's move-in going? Kevin, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I need a straight answer to a straight question. Did Bernard Marchetti Sr. contact you before you brought this listing to me? Silence on the line. 3 seconds. 4. Leo, Kevin. The owner LLC engaged us about 14 months ago to actively canvass for qualified individual tenants in the trades and restoration sector, he said finally, with the voice of a man who has decided that the truth is cheaper than a lawsuit. There were parameters. Single operator, no corporate partner, solid equity base, strong credit. I didn't know you were related until your father called to confirm you'd signed. He called to confirm I'd signed. Monday afternoon, yes. I hung up. Martha looked at me. He was making sure I hadn't gotten cold feet, I said. He was afraid I'd back out. What are you going to do? She asked. I looked around the space. The bare concrete walls, the industrial windows, the lift pillars still laid out on the floor, waiting to be bolted into something permanent. I thought about the 40 hours I had worked on that loop rooftop to make $2,000 in hazard pay. I thought about Sal, the delivery driver, saying times they know exactly where to twist the knife. I thought about my grandmother, the Skokie duplex, the man who had driven her to dialysis 3 times a week and then stolen her estate and then spent 30 years using both facts as proof of his own decency. I thought about Julian sitting in my father's house right now, the house bought with Richie's and Martha's inheritance, rifling through filing cabinets like a crow looking for something shiny. I'm staying, I said. Martha looked at me. Not because he won, I said. Because this contract has my name on it, not his. Because the lifts and the tools and the business, those are mine. He has the building. I have the operation. And in this neighborhood, with the money that's parked 6 blocks from here in River North and the Gold Coast, I'll be profitable inside of 18 months. He can raise the rent at renewal. He can refuse to extend. In 5 years, I'll have the revenue to buy somewhere else or negotiate from a position of strength. And until then, I'll pay his rent with money I make restoring cars for his neighbors. Because people with real money in this city love old cars. They love them the way my father loves controlling things from a safe distance, with someone else doing the actual work. MY. Martha stood slowly. She brushed non-existent dust off her slacks. There was no dust. It was just what you do when you're done sitting but not quite ready to go. And the probate copy? She asked. What Richie gave you? I reached into my jacket. The folded photocopy was still there. I held it out to her. She looked at it, then at me. I don't want that. It's your money, I said. Yours and Richie's. That was your inheritance. I've got no claim on what happened in 1999. I wasn't even born yet. She looked at the paper for a long moment. Then she took it. If I do anything with this, Leo, whatever's left of the family is gone. What's left? I asked. She didn't answer, but she kept the paper. I stayed in the shop another 2 hours after Martha left. I didn't assemble the lift. I didn't prep the floor. I just sat with my back against the concrete wall and did nothing. That was something my first crew chief had taught me on the roof. A guy from Bridgeport who'd been in the trades for 30 years. He said, when you don't know your next move, make no move. Because the noise in your head is louder than any solution, and you're just waiting for it to quiet down. The noise didn't quiet down exactly, but it got organized. My father had bought a building that I would lease. That was a fact. My lease was legal and binding. That was a second fact. I had paid $55,000 that was gone, not into Julian's IRS debt, not into a criminal scheme, but into a prepayment on a building where I would actually work. That was a third fact. And I had $13,000 left, an air compressor on order, a set of snap-on tools still to purchase, and 2 hydraulic lifts currently disassembled on the floor 6 feet away from me. My father had outmaneuvered me. He had done it carefully, over years. With patience I didn't know he possessed, and with a coldness that still didn't feel entirely real when I tried to look at it directly. He had waited until I was strong enough to carry the weight he wanted to put on me, and then he had positioned himself underneath it. But the weight was still mine. I had lifted it. He had only arranged the room. I got up off the floor. I got the socket wrench from the tool bag I'd brought from my studio, and I started on the base plate of the first lift pillar. The bolts were heavy-duty, industrial, the kind that take your whole arm to drive properly. My shoulders burned after the first 4. I kept going. By the time I had the base plate secured, and the first hydraulic column standing vertical locked into the floor of my shop on Lake Street in the West Loop of Chicago, beneath the tracks of the Green Line, in a building owned by a man who thought he could keep his hand on the wheel forever, it was nearly dark outside. I stood back and looked at it. 1 pillar, 1/4 of a 2-post lift. Not much, not nothing. My phone buzzed on the workbench. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Richie. Martha called me. I heard what you said to her about the paper. You didn't have to do that." I looked at the message for a moment. Then I typed back, "I know." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Your grandfather built that duplex with his own hands, brick by brick. 1974. He was an electrician. I thought you should know that." I set the phone down. I thought about a man I had never met, laying brick in Skokie in 1974. I thought about my own hands, which were currently covered in hydraulic grease and bolt grime and the particular kind of grit that comes from concrete floors. I thought about the stack of zoning archives on my shelf at the studio, the ones I hadn't moved yet, and the first client estimate I needed to put together this week for a '68 Camaro restoration a guy in Lincoln Park had been emailing me about for 3 weeks. I picked up the socket wrench and went back to work. The L train went by outside, close enough to rattle the windows. The light from the platform swept across the high ceiling of the shop in a long, moving stripe, bright and then gone, bright and then gone. The city doing what the city does, indifferent, enormous, continuously in motion, completely unbothered by any single man's catastrophe or any single man's beginning. I bolted the second column into the floor and stood back. 2 pillars now, half a lift, a start. The building was his. The business was mine. In 5 years, we would see which one mattered more. I locked the heavy deadbolt on my way out and walked to my truck under the tracks, and I drove home through the city with the windows down and the heat off because the night air was cold and honest, and I wanted to feel exactly where I was.